Going live, and it's live.
Good evening, everyone. I am Monique Coleman, TVI, President of Vista's Education Partners and Coordinator of the National Homework Hotline for Blind and Visually Impaired Students. Thank you for joining us for this special panel discussion, during which we will listen to and learn from parents as they share their perspectives, successes, difficulties, and strategies related to remote learning with blind, deafblind, and low vision children, based on their experiences over the past few months. The wave of COVID-19 school closures that began in March and abruptly thrust students and educators all across the country, and indeed around the world, into wide-scale remote learning has presented a complex array of challenges for children, their families, and school communities. Furthermore, this sudden shift has occurred within the broader context of massive social uprisings that have reverberated around the world and have caused individual and institutional level reckoning with deep-rooted inequities. So it is clear that children and youth and the many people who support their learning are facing an unprecedented time with struggles on many fronts. We also know that students who receive special education services are disproportionately impacted by these challenges. Remote learning poses unique challenges to addressing the disability-specific education needs of blind and visually impaired students. Effective partnerships between school and home, educators and families are more essential than ever as we seek to provide high-quality, accessible, and equitable remote learning programs for blind and visually impaired students. As educators and other support professionals dedicate many hours to preparing for an unconventional school year ahead, it is vitally important that we consider and in some ways reimagine our parent-school connections. This panel discussion will help us do that by centering the voices of parents of blind and visually impaired learners. The goal of this discussion is to provide a platform for parents to share their insights with the intent of assisting and informing educators and supporting other parents. Our moderator for tonight's discussion is Megan Dausch. Megan lives in New York and mentors blind and visually impaired students in Learning Ally's College Success Program. Megan is an access technology instructor. She is also a volunteer responder for the National Homework Hotline for Blind and Visually Impaired Students, the sponsor of this event. Now I turn it over to Megan, who will introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Monique. Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted and honored to facilitate this discussion on the important topic of remote learning. I'm looking forward to listening to our panelists' perspectives. I'll now introduce our panelists. First, we have Arlene and Rick Flores. Arlene and Rick live in California and are parents to first grade deaf-blind twins. Next, we have Allison Hillecker. Allison lives in the Phoenix area and is a blind mother to 2 low vision preschoolers. Next, we have Amnata Safa. Amnata lives in New Jersey and is the mother of a blind kindergartner and a sighted 9th grader. Next, we have Michelle Spano. Michelle lives in New Jersey and is the mother of a low vision 6th grader and a blind 8th grader. Before we begin with our conversation, I would like to let our audience members know that you can please feel free to post questions in the chat box. We will leave time at the end to address any unanswered questions. Now let's begin our conversation. Our first question is, describe what a typical day was like during remote learning in the spring. Allison, would you mind answering that question first?
Sure. Hi. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, we can
Hello?
hear you.
Okay,
Yeah, we can hear you.
perfect. Okay, perfect. Hi. So our days were never typical. Last spring found me with two little girls at home while I work. I work full time. Luckily, I worked from home already pre-COVID, but suddenly I had my kids home all day, every day. I have a 4.5-year-old daughter who was in preschool last year, pre-K this year. She was attending a full-time public Montessori through our district, where she was getting, she was in a gen ed classroom, and then she was getting TVI and O&M services through our district there. And then I have a toddler who is now 2. She wasn't at the time, wasn't quite 2 yet. And she was in early intervention in our state. My girls both have congenital glaucoma, as do I and my husband. So our typical day was we'd get up and we'd start trying to keep our kids busy while we were working. My husband worked part-time at the time, and so he'd have them, and we had a sitter sometimes part of the day, but during the pandemic, that wasn't even always a guarantee. So it was us trying to get my daughter logged into her virtual class for preschool, which wasn't every day, thank goodness, but there was a couple times a week where they'd have a virtual class meeting. And I'd be trying to do that either. Usually I'd get the info for the class, and then I'd either email it or text it to the kid's sitter or to my husband, who would have to get her set up for that meeting. And then we'd have to keep the toddler busy, keep the preschooler engaged on Zoom while I worked. Oftentimes I had kids in and out if there was an issue with the video or not. When we weren't doing class, we would try to do some of the learning activities, but there again, I work full time. So I was trying to do learning things after work in the evenings or on weekends. So whether it was things that were sent home or were emailed to us from the teacher, I was trying to do that evenings and weekends. So during the day, it was mostly trying to keep my kids busy and keeping them occupied so I could take my phone calls at work, because my work was incredibly busy because I work a lot with teachers who were trying to get their students the books they needed for distance learning. So it was a bit scattered and chaotic, but I have to say I'm very thankful to have the support system I had, where I had a husband and our family's nanny was there some of the time to help too, because it truly does take a village, particularly when you have 2 kids under 5 and you're working from home.
Thank you, Allison, for sharing your perspective. It definitely does take a village. Arlene and Rick, would you mind sharing your perspective on what a typical day was like?
Hi. So, can you hear me? Okay. So, challenging, extremely challenging for sure. I tend to, we also have a 4-year-old. I tend to kind of put my 4-year-old, she's kind of on the back burner. No matter how hard I try to keep her involved, it becomes so focused on the twins because, they're hard of hearing and they're blind. And so it wasn't easy trying to now learn a new way of learning through a computer. So now my twins are asked to visually look at a screen. They have to attend to what the instructor is saying. With a lot of background noise, it's really hard to get that feedback. So I had to sit with my girls and explain and give feedback on any missed instruction. On top of that, trying to accommodate and love and provide for my 4-year-old. And so my 4-year-old is in preschool, just likes to be involved, likes to learn, but it's, the twins need that extra support, in which it was really hard to kind of learn on your own. This was all a learning experience for everyone, not just my children. But on top of that, there had to be a special plan for children that are hard of hearing and are blind. So I had to mock somewhat of a schedule to accommodate my children. They were no longer going to see their peers, no longer going to hear their their teachers, no longer have that card ride with dad on the way to get them dropped off for school. So that was something that they look forward to. So Rick and I would try to make that our experience as normal as possible, trying to get them ready early in the morning, have them have breakfast, and kind of mock that schedule. But it was crazy not knowing what to do or who to reach out to when having so many questions and the questions were only answered through email. It's really hard to ask specific questions when you don't really know what to ask for. And so on top of that, you know, very fortunate of me that I wasn't working at the time, and Rick was our main provider at the time. So my main job was home provider and homeschool teacher and loving mother and cook, you name it, everything. And so with that being said, there was a lot of anxiety. It was so stressful, but having a supportive husband really helped overcome that. And then just leaning towards my spiritual side and leaning towards God really helped me overcome this craziness, this madness of new virtual way of, you know, learning. I don't know if you wanted to add something, Ricky.
So I guess just in addition to that, we do have a preschooler who has full vision and isn't affected, and so just that was something that we realized too, is with special needs kids and how much they require to make sure that they're receiving the full curriculum, that, you know, the kids that don't have the special needs, it's very easy to kind of leave them, like Arlene was saying, on the back burner, and for them to almost fend for themselves, because we're both so involved in the twins education plan because of how difficult it can be with their disabilities, and then accounting for the remote learning and just everything, all the new logins and finding the curriculum and where it's listed and making sure that we have the rights to see everything that's needed to turn in, how to even turn the assignments in, you know, all those things created their own challenge.
And then not having the background in actually knowing the Braille and the alphabets, you know, not knowing how to Braille and feed a paper, like that was a huge challenge for me, having to feed paper in a Braille writer. That alone gave me anxiety. Like, how am I supposed to do this without the help of a TVI or any kind of help? But all in all, it was very stressful. And then we figured out a plan to prepare the night before to have an easier day, even though our day was loaded with a bunch of stuff and just really stressful, just to do it all over again. So.
We're having trouble hearing you, Allison.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. What was the question again? My apologies.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me? This is Megan. I'm sorry.
Yes, now I do.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. I had a technical difficulty. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective, Arlene and Rick. It certainly has been a new way of learning for everyone. Michelle, do you mind sharing your perspective?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm gonna go over it because I have two. You know, I have a low vision and I also have mostly blind. Well, now he's going into 8th grade. So our typical day, well, I'm home, let's put it that way. I stopped working. My older son had 83 surgeries. My little guy had about 14. So after that, it was just too much for me to work a full-time job and try to manage my home life and Braille and everything else. So I stopped working to take care of my kids. They're my main priority all the time. My husband works long hours. So our typical day consisted of waking up and keeping a normal school routine. We would get dressed as if they were going to they were physically in school. They would log in. Well, my older son would log in for attendance purposes. And it taught, at the time, my 7th grader how to be on time. Then he would check his email for his assigned work and he'd begin his assignments. If he had any issues, he would message his aide and she would reach out to the teacher for a particular subject. It proved to be much quicker than just waiting for a teacher to get back to us, because I found that in waiting for a teacher, they're so busy with all the other students that a lot of times it was a full day before we would hear back. So he wouldn't get to finish certain subjects. So that worked out rather well. My 5th grader at the time would get an email from his teacher to log on to Google Classrooms. He'd start his assignments. he choose which subjects he wanted to do and complete them accordingly. I found this for him, it was much better for him to choose because he knew what he had to do and he was accountable for it. Regarding specials, meaning like gym and music and everything, he would do them as assigned. He constantly had Zoom meetings with his classroom teacher because, you know, fifth graders, they only have one teacher, which was great for him. And it enabled him to have social interaction with all his classmates. To me, this was very important. And the teacher would go over any difficulties. Like there was one particular time they were having a lot of problems in math, and the teacher had a Zoom meeting and went over what they were all having the problem with. And she explains how to do it, which I found great because the kids were also interacting with each other, as well as, you know, the teacher explained everything. Then the teacher would also make it fun. She would have a day where they would show their favorite stuffed animal, and they would sit there, and the one little boy introduced his little sister one day, and, you know, just things like that, I think helped a lot. And socially, it helped him in a very positive manner. And when my fifth grader had an issue, he would reach out to his teacher. And I would have to say, in moving forward, because this year he'll be in sixth grade, I feel it's important for him to reach out to his aide because the teachers have so many other students that for him, he has a one-on-one aide. It's easier for him to reach out to his aide and go through her. So that was basically our typical day. And I mean, I can't say it was the easiest, but we learned how to adapt, and it is what it is, unfortunately.
Thank you for your perspective, Michelle. Definitely learning responsibility is important. And I'm glad you're able to adapt. Amnata, can you share your perspective?
Hi, sure. So our typical day, we would log in for virtual, which would give my daughter the opportunity to interact with her classmates and her teacher. Then we would log off for a while for independent learning, and have lunch, and then log back in when the teacher would have story time and just have an opportunity for the children to interact and talk to one another. My district was continued all the services. So my daughter has PT, OT, and then she also works with a TVI through the Commission for the Blind. So once the school day would finish, we would then, depending on the day, continue with either PT, OT, or do a Braille session. For us, I think the key was flexibility. I work full time. I'm a single parent, and I also have an upcoming high schooler who is sighted. And while he's very independent, he still needs some encouragement, and also just to kind of check on him and make sure that he's not using his time in ways of just social interactions with his friends. So I needed to also balance work as well as my kindergartner and then my eighth grader. So it was challenging, and I think the key was flexibility and open communication with my daughter's teachers and all the support staff that helped her. We really worked very well together, and they understood my limitations, and we were able to then get through the spring and then go into the extended school year.
Great, thank you for your perspective. Our next question is, what educational supports, learning tools, and instructional approaches were essential to your child's remote learning experience? Amnata, would you like to start by sharing your perspective?
Sure. So we went into virtual learning really quickly. So I had to pick up with understanding what they were learning in kindergarten and try to really adapt that to my daughter's needs. Again, we had a great support through her teachers. Her aide in school was very supportive, and other staff within the school. So what I really needed to learn was to use my resources within the house for her lessons, be it manipulatives, everyday items, and also incorporate just different activity into learning time. So for example, for math, my daughter, as she was having a snack, we would do addition and subtraction with her goldfish and things like that. So we learned to use just the resources around us, to use the materials that we had in the home, as well as reaching out to people externally. Again, her TVI was always available. She has one through the district as well as one through the Commission for the Blind, New Jersey's Commission for the Blind. So they were always available, which was really, really helpful. I would reach out to her aide just to ask how they were doing things in school with my daughter, as well as using resources online, be it a homework hotline or podcasts and things like that. My daughter actually really loves children's podcasts. So we would do that for reading time and for learning just different things. So we just use what was available to us.
Great, thank you so much for your perspective. Allison, would you like to share?
Sure. There are a lot of things I found helpful. For me, the most helpful thing was that I already knew Braille. So parents, if you can learn Braille at all to support your Braille reading kids, I really encourage it, because I know, since I work full time, when I was working with my daughter, my pre-K daughter, on any of her work for school, we would be doing it on evenings and weekends when her TVI or other teachers wouldn't necessarily be available. I mean, I could text them and I could email them and they get back to me, but it wouldn't likely be until the next day. So already knowing Braille and having some basics there helped me a lot, so that I could work with her in those off hours when we didn't have a lot of available help. It's also where I found that homework hotline helpful, just to mention that. I also belong to a couple of Facebook groups that I found helpful, including one done by the National Organization of Parents of Blind Children. I could always hop on there and ask a question and ask people, how do I do this, that, or the other? Thankfully, my kids were young, so that we weren't doing a lot of really hardcore academics. It was mostly trying to keep up the skills they had. My daughter had been learning, working through the Building on Patterns pre-K curriculum at school before it closed. So her TVI emailed us kind of the weekly things she wanted us to work on, just the little highlights and bullet points of what we were supposed to talk about that week, which was usually games like, name things in your house that start with the A sound or A sound, for example. She would email us those suggestions, and then sometimes she would drop off on the porch a contactless drop off. She'd drop off some of the Braille hard copy materials that we've been working on, because when your kiddo is as young as mine are, virtual is not always the most effective way to learn things. So when we really wanted her practicing Braille, we needed to get her fingers on dots. So she dropped off materials for us. We did some of that. It was helpful that I was familiar with how to use a screen reader already, so that I could and I knew something about accessing platforms with my screen reader, because our district, of course, they used Google Meet, but they didn't necessarily know about accessibility. So I'm glad that I knew some of that going in, so I could support my daughter using when she needed to log into her class. Another thing I think I found helpful, I'm a book person. Books are my thing. I'm a huge bookworm. I love reading. I have books all over our house. And I have to say, I'm very thankful that I already had a collection of Braille print children's picture books in my house. I had a lot. So worst case scenario, I figured no matter what happened, no matter how many schools closed and how many libraries closed, we still had books that I could read to my kids. Since I'm a Braille reader myself, whenever I read a book to them, I'm reading Braille and demonstrating Braille. But my kids, while they are Braille learners, they also have partial sight. So they like looking at pictures too, and what of the print they can see. So I'm glad that I had a lot of literacy around them and a lot of words and a lot of books and a lot of stories so that when things close, I could still move forward. I will tell you a funny story. I emailed my younger daughter, who's in early intervention. She was about 22 months when schools closed, and early intervention went virtual. And I emailed her TBI. I think I texted her actually and said, "Wait, I got to get books. Go! Can you run by the library for the our local library of the blind?" I said, "Can you run by the library and pick me up some books? We might run out of books." Which of course was unlikely because we already had a lot of books in our house. But to me, not being able to get books that I could read to my kids was actually a real fear for me, because that's literacy and exposure to books is important, especially when your kids are as young as mine are. So this wonderful woman dropped by our local Foundation for Blind Children, picked up some new print Braille books for us. And I also called our local National Library Service. I will say that has been another invaluable thing. I already had my older daughter signed up for both the National Library Service, often called NLS BARD. That is a library. It's a US library where you can download, you can borrow Braille books, you can download Braille books, or you can borrow or download audiobooks. And I already had her sign up for that, and I'm thankful I did, because I didn't have to figure that out last minute. And that was another way for me to get her. Even when the library finally closed, it didn't close initially, but when it closed, I was still able to download audiobooks for her that she could listen to on her player. And I definitely had her listening to some of them during my Zoom meetings when I didn't have other childcare and I had to keep my kids busy. So, and that was a few of the days last spring. So having that already set up, I also already had a Bookshare, bookshare.org. I had that membership set up for her already as well. And these were things that I had done kind of optionally before the pandemic, just because I thought they'd be helpful ways to enhance my kids' lives. Like, mostly I didn't expect them to need them already at these young ages, but I was thankful that I had, because I had access to learning materials, and whatever I did or did not get from the district at any given time, I could still get them books as needed. And I guess before I wrap up, the other thing I'll say I found very helpful was that we already had a Perkins Braille writer at home. We had borrowed one when my older daughter was in early intervention, and they had let us keep it. And so we had a Brailler so that when it came time to practice Brailing, I didn't want her to forget how to, write her name or Braille out the letters she'd already learned. We were able to practice that, and we didn't have to juggle those materials last minute trying to get them from the school when the school was closed. That was also really helpful. And
Great, thank you so much for Great, thank you so much for sharing. Literacy supports are definitely critical. Arlene and Rick, would you mind sharing your perspective on what supports you had for your children?
So before the whole shutdown, the girls are already part of the Braille Institute library, and they also have an online, it's a BARD app where you can download audiobooks. So before the whole shutdown, I ordered 10 books each, and we have books at home, but it would be, it's nice to have new books, new material to read or be read to. Also, I reached out to a bunch of people. I reached out to National Federation of the Blind, reached out to American Printing House, reached out to Vista's hotline, Homework Hotline. I reached out to Family Resource Center. I reached out to a bunch of programs to help me figure out what I should do to help my daughters not fall through the cracks. And so what was important to me was making sure that my daughters were using their Braille skills to write their name and not forget to spell their name. And so having that support helped me understand and realize that as a parent, you have to continue to advocate no matter what programs are set in place, no matter how much of a pain in the neck you can be. You just continue advocating not only for your children, but you advocate for yourself. I tend to be very flexible with the providers, and it sometimes kind of kicks me in the butt where I'm running myself down. And I learned to say, hey, I'm not comfortable with this, or hey, this is too much, or hey, I need more help. What really helped with the hard of hearing is I had to go out and purchase speakers from Best Buy because with a lot of the background noise from the children's home and not being able to hear the instructor's instruction, having to sit next to my daughters and having to repeat every missed instruction was too much for me to handle. And so putting the speakers in and setting that up really helped lessen that workload on my plate.
Great, thank you so much for sharing. And that actually leads us to a question from the chat. One of our audience members was wondering if your children use an FM system with their computers or at all in school?
Yes, they do. Actually, they have an FM system that the teachers have a microphone that's connected to, and it's a direct connection to their hearing aids. So we've noticed that that is beneficial when it's managed correctly. One problem we were running into was the overusage of the FM system, where at times there was a microphone just kind of getting passed around from kid to kid in the middle of it. This is when they were still in school, getting, passed around from kid to kid, or being used outside, like during physical activities, things like that, where there's a lot of background noise and a lot of interruption. And they were actually having even more trouble using the FM system when there was a good amount of background noise that could cause interference. They were having trouble picking out the exact instructions they should be following, but we did find it to be very beneficial when it's one-on-one instruction and more of a quiet type setting.
Thank you, we appreciate you sharing. And Michelle, would you share your perspective on what educational supports and learning tools were essential for your children?
Sure. With regards to remote learning for both boys, I think mainly my sons use Bookshare. They use their TBIs and their technology teacher. They learned a lot. I actually like remote learning for their TBIs and also their technology. I thought they benefit a lot from the remote learning because they made it fun. It wasn't just, all right, let's have a technology instruction or let's have, your TBI instruction. They made it fun. So I think for us, that worked out well. It helped them achieve their highest level of learning possible. Google Classrooms, I think it helped my son to be organized. It worked out really well because he was able to see everything in front of him and decide what he wanted to do. So for us, that worked well. And for my 7th grader, I think emails, the teachers would email him, and I think it helps him become accountable for his time. He was able to become more self-confident moving forward. And I personally, I'm not 100% thrilled about remote learning, but I think for us, it really benefit them in many ways. So.
Thank you. Just a question for the chat directed to all of our panelists. An audience member was wondering whether your children were able to have OT and speech therapy or any other therapies that they might need during the time of remote learning.
This is Emnada Safa. So for myself, my daughter did continue with her OT, her PT. They pretty much kept the schedule going. Depending on between OT and PT, they may just post something, activities for her to do, and we would check in depending on the week. And some weeks we would do a virtual session with her OT and PT, but our district, was able to continue with all her services, essentially. There really was no interruption in services.
For my boys, neither one of my boys get OT or PT, so it's not, something we have.
My daughter, the district said she didn't qualify for OT or speech. I disagreed. So my daughter is in private OT that we pay through our health insurance, and we did that remotely soon after schools closed. So we actually did that kind of through a telehealth platform. And in some ways, I would say it was harder on my daughter. She didn't like it as well. well, she did it first when it was a new thing. She was excited about it. But after all, she found it harder to engage virtually. But I liked it as a parent because I feel like I was more directly involved in the OT sessions in a way that I hadn't been so much when we went in person to this, what was a large, basically a large therapy room with a lot of different kids and other therapists and activities and equipment. I actually thought I got more personal interaction with the therapist and also understanding of what was going on in the sessions than I did normally. So I guess that was a benefit of sorts to virtual, although I do think for young kids especially, virtual is tricky. So I think I enjoyed the switch more than my daughter did to virtual OT.
I will say that both the twins got OT and speech and hard of hearing and O&M, and I believe that was it. So all in all, that was very difficult on us because it was instruction through emails or instruction through phone calls, do this. So it turned out that Rick and I were both the providers in providing these goals and implementations in their IEP. Made it extremely stressful and impossible to do all those things while trying to learn Braille and read Braille and trying to keep the kids happy and trying to set a routine. So what really helped me was really focusing on what was really important, and that was learning Braille. I signed up for the Hadley education and I was learning Braille online through a certified instructor. And with doing so, it really helped me give me a better perspective on what my children are asked or what's expected of them, and know that being on a Braille writer for too long, it's strenuous on the neck, on the eyes, and the whole body. And so that helped me understand and learn Braille, the Nemeth code. But as far as having OT services and PT and all of that, it was extremely hard because it fell on us. It was, here are the instructions, now complete it and get back to me with some feedback. I appreciate the providers being there and giving that support through email and phone call, but it's extremely impossible to do it with deafblind twins and a 4-year-old running around, trying to keep a smile on your face and trying to keep positive to keep the kids motivated. So all in all, I felt that Braille instruction, reading and writing, and wasn't very important. Is very important, and general education. Everything else, it was just hard to give O&M instruction in, not a natural environment. Our children do not use the canes indoors, and not having the option to train with someone outdoors was extremely hard. And so I feel it was a bit of a setback.
Thank you for
Actually,
sharing.
if I can add to what I was saying, I had forgotten that actually my younger daughter, my toddler who's in early intervention, is receiving OT services through early intervention. And once those moved to virtual, the thing I found most challenging, particularly working full time, was that the OT would send us an email or a text the night before and say, oh, can you have such and such materials ready for our session tomorrow? And I'd panic because here's me in the morning trying to get my kids up and ready for the day and get myself ready for work. We would do early intervention sessions early in the morning before I started work. And so here I am on top of all that, trying to get us ready, trying to gather shaving cream, glue, construction paper, and all these bits of materials that, while can be very important for toddler OT, it was a lot. It was a lot to get to coordinate on top of everything else I was doing. I have to say it was worth it, but it was not the easiest thing I've done.
Thank you so much for sharing. It seems like it would be helpful for students to have a more synchronous therapy rather than a list of activities potentially. Thank you for all sharing your details, the detailed perspectives you offered. The next question that we have for our panelists this evening, and most of you have touched on this, but what were some of the biggest challenges you and your children experienced? And what solutions or workarounds did you find to some of these challenges? Allison, would you like to share first?
Sure. So we started off doing her general education classroom meetups through Zoom because that's what the district was using. Again, she was in preschool. She'd been going to a public Montessori. So they moved some of their class meetups, it was once or twice a week. They'd have a meetup with the teacher and her classmates. And Zoom went well. We liked that. It was working. And then a couple weeks in, the district decided to switch to Google Meet because of some privacy concerns, which is understandable. However, Google Meet was trickier for us with screen readers that we're using as parents ourselves. We found out that it when we wanted on our daughter's iPad, it didn't work in the browser. I mean, sorry, it only worked in the browser, not in the app itself with VoiceOver. But more than that, we found our daughter, who, as I mentioned, is partially sighted. She couldn't see the other students as well on Google Meet as she could with Zoom. She was used to the screen layout visually looking one way in Zoom, and when we switched to Google Meet, it really frustrated her. She couldn't see the other students and herself as well before. I'm still not clear on exactly if there was anything that could have been done to solve it, but honestly, it was really frustrating for her. It caused many meltdowns because she's a preschooler. If it doesn't look right, it's not happening. So that was really frustrating, I think. And honestly, my solution was, after a couple of just frustrating classroom meetups, we stopped going. I didn't have her log in to the Gen Ed class meetups anymore because they just made her so frustrated and sad. And nothing I said to the district about the issues with Google Meet's visual accessibility for low vision kiddos changed their minds. So we just stopped going to that. I will say one thing that was a challenge that did mostly get resolved was the classroom teacher emailed kind of distance learning activities. On Monday each week, she'd email it to parents, because this was a Montessori school. So, a lot of the things the kids do already are hands-on and interactive. So that the teacher wanted to make sure we had some hard copy things to do with the kids, not just things that we did over Google Meet, which is nice in theory. But what we got over email was 8 printables, basically just picture files of things for us to print out and have our daughter color or write on or do with us as parents. And unfortunately, printables don't work for a partially blind kiddo, nor do they work for blind parents. So we had to do a lot of emailing back and forth and talking to the classroom teacher and talking to the TVI and talking to the special ed assistant director in our district to figure out how we were going to get these materials in some format that would be useful to our family. And we did eventually get that worked out. It took the gen ed teacher having to send her materials a week ahead of time to the TVI, who would then make sure we had an accessible copy sent to us in email on the day the rest of the class got their emails. And it got better as time went on, but I will say it was always a glitchy process, which actually made me kind of wonder how materials were getting provided in class when class was in person. Although I will say, because it's Montessori, there weren't a lot of handouts. So I don't think it had come up much before the switch to distance learning. Lastly, my struggle I found was when they were in the Google Meet virtual classroom meetups, basically, where my daughter was with her classmates and her teacher on Google Meet. I noticed that there wasn't a lot of verbal description of what was going on, which probably led back to my daughter's frustration with not being able to see all of the other kids and the teacher as well on Google Meet as she had been able to on Zoom. And in addition to that, there was not a lot of verbal description, which is something written as an accommodation in her IEP, but I can only assume was also not happening when school was in person either. Yet in person, it had been less of a problem because she could see it more than she could on a screen. So that took some conversations with the classroom teacher about the importance of, being very descriptive when you're holding something up or when you're doing something over the Google Meet. Please, describe what you're holding or what you're doing or what other students are holding or doing. So that took a bit of a learning curve on everyone's part, but got a little better over time, at least until the platform changed. So.
Great, thank you for sharing how you advocated. And Arlene and Rick, could you talk about the challenges and solutions that you came up with?
Like Allison was saying, is not having that rich description from their teachers, or read this letter and it's on regular small icon. And so having to constantly repeat and remind the teachers, enlarge it, they can't see it, the background's too bright, it's too much of a glare. It became very frustrating, not only for myself, but for my children as well, resulted in tears. And so having to communicate out to California Deafblind Services, we had a representative come out and sit in during a Zoom session to get an understanding of what the girls were lacking or what they could do to improve the girls' instruction. And so that kind of gave a better perspective on the general education teacher to understand that not only are they blind, they're deaf as well. So they have to compensate for so much. And so not having the accommodations for my children during virtual learning made it very difficult. So the solution was reaching out and having open communication with administrators, and regardless if they're receptive or not. And it's just, again, advocating for your children and being repetitive and saying, hey, we need help, we need the support. We as parents are very involved, but there's only so much that we can do. We're running thin here. And
well, and to touch base on something Allison said as well is we noticed that during this virtual learning that it really did expose quite a few inadequacies in their education plan, that they were telling us these things were being provided. And as far as like, materials being translated into something that they can learn from, or in having these, the right communication or like descriptive words or these type of things. A lot of these things were missing. And we noticed this when we started this virtual learning, that these are all things that we kept bringing up on, where are these things? How can we get this translated into something that they can work with? And supposedly all this was supposed to be happening during the school year. But then once now we got involved, we noticed, quite a few holes in their planning and quite a few different things that needed to be addressed.
And then not having the supplies and materials timely was a bit of a challenge. Having to modify myself. I didn't have a printer to print out, and regardless, printing out pages and pages of worksheets that they cannot see was extremely impossible. So I had to hand write all of their work assignments in large print, had to use a blackboard and write in big writing so they can see their math numbers and work on some adding and subtracting. Like what Rick was saying, it just gave something surfaced. We knew that just seeing that things are not just, I guess, kind of like put on the back burner. Kind of we're being told like, yes, this is being done, but really now that we're in it 100%, I do see that there's a lot of gaps in their education plan.
Thank you for sharing. We do have a follow-up question for you from an audience participant. The audience member would like to know if your children work with an intervener.
Not yet. So we are currently in a bit of a process in trying to get an intervener to act more as an aid, to work specifically with them. So we've been in communication with an agency that provides intervener services, and a number of different interveners, intervener teachers as well. And that was just a matter of, getting the education plan to also agree with us that an intervener is necessary.
Because the intervener services is something new in California. This is something they started 2 years ago. So the school district is seeing it as something they've never done before, so they can't do it. And so this is something that we don't agree. It's doable. We see, firsthand that it's really complicated trying to accommodate deafblind children, and then to have, an aide that has, autism background, but no blind background or no vision, no hearing background, makes it extremely difficult for my girls to be in tune with their class. My girls are extremely smart. They're very aware. They want to learn. They like to learn. And so to not have the accommodations makes it very frustrating, not only for them, but for myself, my husband, and my 4-year-old. It's just too much stress trying to put the pieces together with the very minimal support.
Thank you. Amnata, would you share your challenges and solutions?
Sure. So we went into the virtual learning very quickly. The last day of school, I went into the school and her teacher had about 5 weeks of materials adapted for her. They also, it was a team of about 4 people just collecting all the materials from out of the classroom for me to bring home to be able to use as part of her learning. And with that, they kind of gave me a high level overview of what things were used for, with what, and how the lessons plans would be done. Well, that was the Friday. Come Monday, I had these boxes of materials, and I'm like, wait, how do I then put it together and really go through a learning plan with her for a day? Her teacher was really organized, and she was open to just changes, thoughts, opinions from parents. So I reached out to her and I told her that if she maybe would post the syllabus the night before or 2 nights before, so then I could collect the materials along with the actual lessons and put it together, kind of go through it myself, and then work with my daughter to be able to better assist her as part of her learning. So initially, I think the challenge was really just kind of changing that frame of thought to being a teacher, essentially, and sitting one on one with my daughter and going through her learning. We really had to get very organized, and I had to learn a lot of flexibility between work and between just now stepping into this new role as a teacher with my daughter. So I think there were many challenges. They changed, and I think shift throughout the period of being at home and doing the at-home learning. So initially, it was really just understanding the materials that I received. I was really overwhelmed with now this new function within the home. And I had to take some steps back, even with work, and say, I have to log off for a while to do learning, and just being able to manage both working at home and helping teach at home. And for our children, we have to be there one-on-one with them, where other visual learners, the parents in my daughter's class, they were leaving the kids and able to go and do other things when in the home during the learning sessions, where we're not able to do that. So it really was just changing the thinking, the way of thinking, getting organized. And that's how I was able to overcome some of those challenges and really kind of get to a place of being comfortable with stepping into this new role as teacher, so to speak.
Thank you so much for your perspective. And Michelle, do you have anything to add?
For me, it was just basically for my younger son, the worksheets. The gym teacher was sending over worksheets, crossword puzzles and things, like more or less like busy work, which were not accessible for my son. He can't see tiny little crossword puzzles. So for me, what I would do was it came to the point where I said, you know what? I'll tell you the words, I'll help you find the words. And basically is more like the parents doing the work, which moving forward, we would like, more accessible things for our blind children. With regard to my older son, art, he had to do a project in art. And normally what he says, what happens is the art teacher will go right up to him, show him what she expects, because he could see if you're showing it to him right in front of his face. She'll show it to him, and then he could basically do his artwork from there. But considering we're on remote learning, it wasn't happening that way. So basically what I had to do was make a mock-up and get a Sharpie and do it myself for him so that he was able to do it from there. So, I don't know. There's got to be something that we could probably do moving forward in the specials so that it's more of the kids doing the work and not so much as the parents. And granted, this was an unforeseen circumstance. Everybody was thrown into this. But now I think we've all had enough time to think about it. And moving forward, I would like to see both boys become a lot more independent in these areas with the help of accessibility.
Great, thank you for your perspective. Yes, hopefully we've learned from the spring and can have a stronger fall.
Yes.
Our next question is, can you describe some of the highlights and unexpected benefits of remote learning? What surprised you in a good way? Michelle, would you like to start with that one?
Sure. Some highlights of remote learning were the boys were obviously in a safe environment. That was a positive. I was able to oversee their daily work, so I knew what they were actually doing in school. Whereas if we were in actual school, I would say, "What did you do in school today?" "Oh, you know, stuff," because that's what boys do at that age. I think Braille and technology worked great remotely. My 7th grader, which now 8th grader, moved into a more responsible young man. I think my 5th grader learns how to toughen up in areas that sometimes, you know, life gives you curveballs and you have to adapt to it. And he learns how to do that very well. I think these kids that have gone through this pandemic are stronger kids because of everything they endured. I feel that in the past, my 7th grader has relied on other people to do things for him. And I think being thrown into this, he learns how to do things for himself. And I think he surprised a lot of the teachers and case managers and his aide because he really learns how to self-advocate for himself. And I thought it was great because I said to him, "Oh, well, you have to, you have to message your teacher." "Oh, I already did that." So in the past, he wouldn't have done that. He would have waited for me to say, "Okay, well, let's email your teacher," but he learns how to do it himself. And I think that was a positive. And like I said, if you asked either boy, they would both say they are all for remote learning. The only disadvantage that I did find with the remote learning and moving forward, if they're on Zoom and they're in a new class this year, the kids are not going to know who's speaking. Like if the teacher starts, asking questions, it's all new voices for these kids. They're going to have no idea who's speaking unless maybe they recognize the voice because the kid was in the class prior to. When my, now 8th grader, was a 6th grader, he was very quiet in class. He didn't say much and he seemed almost, full of anxiety because of the fact that he was in a completely new environment, had no idea who was speaking. The comfort level was not there. And I think 7th grade, he changed into a completely different child. He learned who was who, just an all-around happier child. So kids that are moving forward to a new school with new kids, the parents, I hope you have faith that once they learn who's in their classes and they learn their surroundings, they'll be much more comfortable and much more confident. I think you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Amnata, would you like to share next?
Hi, sure. Michelle, I just want to say that was a really great point in that the kids going to the next grade, they're not going to know their classmates really and who's speaking. So that was actually a note that I just kind of jotted down. So thank you for saying that. I really do appreciate that. In terms of the benefits, I would say we all learned Braille in my home. I knew the alphabet a little bit, but in terms of contractions and the .5 contractions, full word contractions, like really understanding that, I would not have been able to understand that really if it wasn't for this period of at-home learning. Also, I could also see where my daughter is academically versus relying on her teachers or anyone else telling me, "Oh, she's doing fine, she's doing well, this is what we're learning." Now I can really understand she really does need work in certain areas versus she really thrives in other areas. So those were some of the benefits. Also, from an extracurricular standpoint, because everything went virtual, like dance and gymnastics and things like that also went virtual. So I was able to sign my daughter up and really support her in joining new activities. So during this time at home, my daughter started a gymnastics course. And they were doing that virtually, and she loves it. She's doing great. And that's been helping her in terms of her PT. So I've been able to support her better as a parent since we've been home during this period. And I feel more comfortable even going into her going to first grade and knowing where she is and what areas I really need to talk to her teachers about versus areas that she's doing well.
Great, thank you so much for sharing how you were able to support her. Rick and Arlene, would you like to share about the benefits?
Yeah, and very similar to what's been touched base before, like I'm not at what you just said as far as forcing us and well myself to be more hands-on in their education, learning things like braille contractions and the Nemeth code and all these things that when I first saw it, to be honest, I was scared. When I first looked at that first braille sheet, it's like, okay, I'm never gonna learn this. I'll just kind of go through the motions, give lip service to homework and hopefully it gets done, and they're learning it in school, the teachers got it. But once it kind of fell on us, then it made me honestly realize how much I need to know to really be able to teach them and for them to improve in this. And then to also, like was mentioned before, to address the gaps in their education, to really see where their weaknesses are. Because I think a lot of times with like, special needs teachers and, they may be kind of like they don't want to upset the parents. It's almost something like they want to just tell you, oh, everything's fine. They're doing great. They love it here. They're making friends, because maybe they feel like we're dealing with so much as parents. They don't want to add more to our stress level. And so a lot of times we don't get real straight talk from the parents. Ask them, how are they doing? What are they lacking in? Like, oh, they're so cute. Like, yeah, well, I mean, I know that, but like really, where, what are we talking about here? Like where are they at? Like when I'm talking to her, I know, when I'm talking to them, I can see that there's certain things missing, but we're not getting the right type of communication from the educators. And so having to be hands-on and performing a lot of the education duties has really allowed us to see where they're lacking, where their strengths are as well, and the things that we need to work on to, bring up the things that they may be lacking.
So a few positives on my side is knowing what type of learners my girls are, visually, tactile, audio, all of it, and knowing that having the right accommodations and thinking outside the box to accommodate them really does make a difference. Realizing like, oh, she does understand what she is asked of, but it's really hard to do it without the accommodations. Number two is reaching out to outside resources and made so many friends and networking through people and learning through these resources. The twins, after the spring, last year, the school semester, I registered the girls into the American Printing House summer camp virtually. We've learned so much, doing the Bell Academy through National Federation of the Blind. It was so accommodating. They delivered, a box full of materials, braille papers, syllabus, you name it. And not only that, the girls were in need of a cane. They had growth spurt and we had no cane. And so National Federation of the Blind has a free cane program. And so the girls received a white cane in the mail for free. And so knowing how to ask for help and knowing to be repetitive in asking for help, that was a big plus for me, because I feel like now that I know a little bit more, now it's my job to give back to my community and to share with the new moms and the new parents where to go for help, that it's okay. It's all a learning experience, and we have to teach each other how to overcome it. And so that was a big highlight in my life during this COVID.
Great, thank you for sharing. It really seems that there's a theme of being able to really observe your child's education firsthand, and also asking for help is okay, and that's a really important lesson. Allison, would you like to share?
I think Allison stepped out for a minute. I saw in the chat a message pop up.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll go on to our next question. We were wondering if what have you done that you haven't shared so far today to help your children stay motivated and engaged during this time? Michelle, would you like to share how you've helped your children stay motivated?
Sure. The main thing I did was to stay in the next room so that I was always available. Thankfully, I'm home. I had one child we have a spare bedroom downstairs, and I have a couple of years ago, I went out when we got the CCTV. I said, you know what? I'm going to go out and buy these great desks. I got them in IKEA. They were like $30, cheap little chairs. Let me tell you something. Those desks were the best thing I ever bought because I've used them so much. So my one son stays in this room, and then we also have a desk in the kitchen, and my other son was in there temporarily until I renovated my office to make it more kid friendly. And now he's going to be in that room so that they're further away from each other so that they're not hearing each other, because both of them have bionic hearing. And it's important that they're able to concentrate through this whole process. So basically I just stayed on hand for them. And I don't know. I remember trying to think what else.
That's great.
And then I always rewarded them after the Zoom meetings or whatever. I would say, okay, well, if you do this, you have time on my son has this Oculus Quest thing that you put on your head, and it's like virtual reality. And it's actually good for him because he can see up close. So he's been playing that. And it's also a great form of exercise as well. So it was like almost like he was getting his gym time in as well, because the kids actually burn a sweat playing this. So that's basically what we did.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
Arlene and Rick, would you mind sharing if you have any for how you kept your children motivated?
So routine is a plus. Routine. Mocking the school schedule for the week. Monday through Friday, you do your breakfast, you do your lessons, you have your lunch, you have your snacks, you have your free play, you have your arts and crafts, then you have your dinner time, your homework, you name it. Weekends are specifically weekends. There is no homework, there is no learning outside. We try to sneak in a little learning here and there, but your reward is Friday movie nights. You guys do a really good job during your lessons. We're gonna pop some fresh popcorn, or on Saturday, we're gonna have a special snack, or we're gonna watch a special movie, or we're gonna have a sleepover in the living room. You have to change things around because this can be, it can get a little stale, not only for the children, but for the parents as well. And so what's really important is self-care. You have to take care of yourself, whether it be buy a new magazine, go out for a walk, do your hair, I don't know, put on some lipstick, whatever it may be, cook a meal that you've been wanting to cook for a while, spend some time with your spouse, read a book. I don't know, take a class online if you have the time. You have to remember that you are important as well, because without you, your kids are no good. You're no good to them. You're overwhelmed, and then you're overwhelming them with your own vibe, your own, stresses and anxiety. And so self-care has really helped me. And reaching out to Family Resource Center, they have a parent support group. They do it 1 hour every Friday. And that has been very helpful, having to log in and talk to other parents that have gone through the same thing and talk about things other than your children, And so I found that very helpful. And so again, exercise, a good diet, self-care, it's a necessity.
Okay, great, thank you. Amnata, would you like to share? I know we're getting close on time, but would you like to share?
Sure. Well, so my daughter, it really doesn't take much to have to motivate her. She really is self-motivated for the most part. I don't know if it's her age or just, she just really has a very sunny disposition. But one thing that I did not realize was happening, and I don't know if this is good or bad, but my brother would come in and help her sometimes in the morning, and they would have a 9 a.m. cookie. It was always one cookie, and it was 9 a.m. before classes started. And I had no idea this was taking place. but this was their treat, and it would kind of get her, you know, going and ready for her learning. I walked in one day and I was just like, I walked out of my home office into the kitchen and I'm like, what's happening? Why is she eating a chocolate chip cookie? And she just told me this is what we do. And I was like, okay. And I backed up and I walked away. If this is what you need, it's fine. But I think also just finding just other things to do, be it just go for a walk, taking a breath of fresh air. I loaded our backyard with just different things, a small pool, a slip and slide. Like I just kind of did what I could to make the house a little more fun and not just a place of school. Because I found that it was hard for me to separate work from home. And for the kids, it was like learning, and their place at home of play just kind of took on a new form. So I just had to kind of be creative in the house. But again, she really does have a good disposition, and she would find her own things like new podcasts. Like I said, she loves children's podcasts. There are a lot of great ones out there. And she would find some new ones and we would talk about it over dinner.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. Um, Allison, could you share strategies that help motivate your children? If you could please keep it brief, just because we're running out of time.
Sure.
So
I'd love to. Short answer is my older daughter is autistic and has ADHD in addition to being partially blind. So there is not a sticker or a word chart alive that's going to motivate her if she doesn't want to do a thing. She's very internally motivated. So I had to be very creative. I had to input as much novelty into our learning as possible. Weather's beautiful here in March and April in Arizona, so we were able to turn our learning space into turn our backyard into a learning space. We did a lot of her Braille reading type activities on our picnic table in our backyard, for example. We found ways to incorporate math while out on our walks, along with a little O&M while we were taking socially distanced walks around our neighborhood. It just took a lot of me being playful, a lot of me taking deep breaths and reminding myself that ultimately our kids may not remember what they learned during the pandemic and during distance learning. What they will remember is the time with us and how it made them feel. And so I kept reminding myself of that, so that if one day she just wasn't going to do some school or academic tasks that I wanted her to do, it was okay to let it go sometimes, because ultimately I want her to remember this as being a positive time. And I find that the more I do that, the more I'm willing to let go sometimes, the more I'm able to get her cooperation during other times when it's important. So that's what I've learned from this, I think.
thank you very much. We appreciate your response, and we're out of time for this event. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you so much to our panelists for sharing your perspectives and experiences. Thank you to our audience members for attending and for your thoughtful questions. We hope that you found this conversation helpful in planning for the upcoming school year. Thank you so much.